The world is witnessing a profound shift in the global balance of power. As the U.S. retreats, China is expanding its influence, reshaping international institutions to align with its interests. Under Trump, the U.S. has disengaged from key international agreements, signaling a shift away from global cooperation. This retreat has created a vacuum that China is eager to fill, positioning itself as a champion of globalization. China has seized the opportunity to expand its influence, leveraging economic power and strategic diplomacy. Initiatives like the Belt and Road are expanding China's sphere of influence, challenging Western dominance. The U.S. withdrawal from the WHO during a global pandemic illustrated its retreat from multilateralism. This move weakened global efforts to combat COVID-19, undermining international cooperation. The U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement isolated it as a global outlier on climate change. This decision undermined international efforts to address one of humanity's most pressing challenges. Cutting funding to the UN weakened its ability to address global challenges. This move reflected a deep-seated hostility towards multilateralism, impacting peace, security, and development. The U.S. retreat from multilateralism under Trump had profound implications for global governance. This shift weakened institutions and norms that had underpinned global stability for decades. As the U.S. stepped back, China expanded its influence, adopting a more assertive foreign policy. This strategic shift allowed China to reshape the international order to reflect its own values. With the U.S. turning inward, China positioned itself as a champion of globalization. China's vision of a multipolar world resonated with many countries, challenging the U.S.-led order. Central to China's strategy is the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, launched in 2013. This massive infrastructure project connects China to Asia, Africa, and Europe, projecting Chinese power globally. The BRI involves roads, railways, ports, and pipelines financed by billions in Chinese loans and investments. It secures resources, strengthens diplomatic ties, and promotes China's development model. The BRI is a strategic tool for expanding China's global influence. By investing in infrastructure and forging new partnerships, China aims to reshape the geopolitical landscape. As China's economic and political clout grew, so too did its influence within international organizations. Recognizing that these institutions played a crucial role in shaping global norms and rules, China adopted a more proactive approach to multilateral diplomacy, seeking to increase its representation, elevate its voice, and advance its interests within these bodies. This strategic shift was evident in China's increased financial contributions to international organizations, its efforts to place Chinese nationals in key leadership positions, and its active participation in negotiations and decision-making processes. China's leaders understood that to shape the global order, they needed to be present and engaged at all levels of international governance. China's growing influence within international organizations was particularly noticeable in its dealings with the United Nations. China, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, already wielded considerable power within the organization. However, China sought to expand its influence beyond the Security Council, engaging more actively in other UN agencies and bodies, such as the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, and the UN Human Rights Council. This increased engagement allowed China to shape the agenda of these organizations, promote its own vision of global governance, and counter criticisms of its human rights record and trade practices. By playing a more active role in international organizations, China aimed to ensure that these bodies reflected its interests and values, contributing to a more multipolar world in which China's voice carried greater weight. The Trump administration's America First policy, marked by a retreat from multilateralism, sent shockwaves through the global system. Long-standing U.S. allies grappled with uncertainty, questioning their future with Washington. The bedrock of U.S. foreign policy had been its network of alliances. These alliances provided the foundation for global stability. Trump's actions left allies feeling abandoned and vulnerable. His criticisms of NATO and unpredictable policies created distrust. Allies doubted U.S. security guarantees and questioned Washington's commitment. This led to a period of soul-searching among U.S. allies. Germany and France reaffirmed multilateralism, strengthening European cooperation. Japan and South Korea deepened U.S. ties while engaging more with China. The Trump administration's foreign policy did not just strain relations with allies outside the West. It also exposed deep fissures within the Transatlantic alliance, the cornerstone of the liberal international order for over 7 decades. Trump's worldview, which viewed alliances as transactional arrangements rather than partnerships based on shared values, clashed with the more cooperative and multilateral instincts of European allies. Trump's criticisms of NATO, his imposition of tariffs on European steel and aluminum, his withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal and the Paris Climate Accord, and his perceived affinity for authoritarian leaders like Vladimir Putin created significant friction between Washington and its European partners. These disagreements went beyond policy differences. They reflected fundamental divergences in values and worldviews. European leaders were dismayed by Trump's disregard for the rules-based international order that the U.S. had played a pivotal role in establishing after World War II. They saw his actions as undermining the very institutions and norms that had underpinned global stability and prosperity for decades. This sense of disillusionment was exacerbated by Trump's personal style, which was often seen as abrasive, impulsive, and disrespectful. The Trump presidency therefore marked a period of unprecedented strain in the transatlantic relationship. While the alliance endured, it emerged from the Trump era weakened and uncertain about its future direction. The erosion of trust, the divergence in values, and the lack of a shared strategic vision posed significant challenges for the future of transatlantic cooperation. Section 3. Embracing the dragon opportunities and risks for U.S. allies in a China-centric world. As the United States retreated from its global commitments and the transatlantic alliance fractured, China sensed an opportunity to expand its influence and reshape the international order in its favor. China actively courted U.S. allies, offering economic incentives, diplomatic overtures, and a vision of a multipolar world in which China played a more prominent role. For some U.S. allies, particularly those heavily reliant on trade with China and those seeking to diversify their foreign policy options, China's overtures presented both opportunities and risks. On the one hand, closer economic ties with China offered access to a vast and growing market, while increased diplomatic engagement promised a greater voice in international affairs. On the other hand, closer ties with China carried the risk of becoming overly dependent on Beijing, both economically and politically. There were also concerns about China's human rights record, its aggressive actions in the South China Sea, and its efforts to export its authoritarian model of governance. This balancing act navigating between the United States and China became increasingly complex for many U.S. allies. They sought to maintain their security ties with Washington while simultaneously exploring opportunities for cooperation with Beijing. This hedging strategy reflected the uncertainties of a world in transition, where the old certainties of the US-led order were fading, and a new, more fluid and multipolar system was emerging. Section 4, Hedging Bets. Navigating the complexities of a multipolar world order. The Trump presidency accelerated the shift from a unipolar to a multipolar world, with China rising. This shift created challenges and opportunities for international relations. U.S. allies faced a dilemma. They needed to maintain ties with the U.S. for security, but China's rise couldn't be ignored. China's influence grew through international organizations and infrastructure projects. U.S. allies adopted a hedging strategy. They balanced ties with both the U.S. and China. This strategy was complex and risky. It required careful policy calibration. Miscalculations could lead to conflicts. Section 1. The long game: China's patient pursuit of global primacy. China's strategic ambitions extend far beyond merely filling the void left by the United States. China's leaders, steeped in history, aim to restore China as a leading global power. Unlike the US, China's approach is pragmatic and patient. They play the long game, expanding influence gradually. This is evident in their economic strategy, military modernization, and diplomacy. China focuses on economic growth and technological advancement. Simultaneously, they modernize their military to project power. Diplomatically, China builds global relationships with economic incentives. This approach is successful in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. China's rise poses a challenge to the US and its allies. The question is how China will exercise its power and shape the world order. Section 2, A Fork in the Road, the future trajectory of U.S. foreign policy. The Trump presidency marked a departure from the post-World War II consensus. His America First approach emphasized unilateralism and transactional diplomacy. The U.S. now faces a critical juncture in its foreign policy. Will it return to multilateralism or continue unilateralism? The Biden administration aims to restore American leadership and confront global challenges. However, the domestic political landscape remains deeply divided. The rise of China and the diffusion of power have created a complex international environment. The choices made by U.S. policymakers will shape the country's future and the international order. Section 3. The Contest of Systems, Competing Visions of Global Order. The rivalry between the United States and China is a contest of systems, a clash between two fundamentally different models of governance and international relations. This ideological struggle will shape the 21st century as profoundly as the Cold War rivalry shaped the 20th century. The United States champions a liberal international order based on democracy, free trade, and human rights. This order has underpinned decades of relative peace and prosperity. China offers a competing vision rooted in authoritarianism and state capitalism. China's model emphasizes national sovereignty and a greater role for the state. This contest of systems is playing out in various arenas around the world. Economically, China's state-led model challenges the free market orthodoxy of the United States. Technologically, China's advancements raise concerns about surveillance and privacy. Diplomatically, China's assertiveness and efforts to reshape international institutions put it at odds with the U.S. The outcome of this contest will have profound implications for the future of global order. Will the world continue to be governed by rules established by the U.S. and its allies? Or will China's vision of a more authoritarian, state-centric order prevail? The retreat of the United States from its global leadership role, coupled with the rise of China and other revisionist powers, has created a leadership vacuum in international affairs. This lack of clear leadership has left the world adrift, less able to address pressing global challenges and more vulnerable to conflict and instability. The rules-based international order that emerged after World War II with its emphasis on multilateralism, international law and collective security was never perfect. However, it provided a framework for managing international relations, fostering cooperation and mitigating the risk of major power conflict. The erosion of this order, driven by a combination of U.S. retrenchment, the rise of nationalism, and the resurgence of great power competition, has created a more uncertain and dangerous world. Countries are increasingly pursuing their interests unilaterally, international institutions are struggling to maintain their legitimacy and effectiveness, and the risk of miscalculation and conflict is growing. This leadership vacuum is particularly dangerous in an era of unprecedented global challenges, such as climate change, pandemics, cyber threats, and nuclear proliferation. These challenges transcend national borders and require coordinated international action to address effectively. Without clear leadership and a shared sense of purpose, the international community is ill-equipped to tackle these challenges effectively. The result is a world adrift, more vulnerable to crises, conflict, and the erosion of the very norms and institutions that have underpinned decades of relative peace and prosperity. The global stage is being reset. The established order, meticulously crafted under American leadership, is experiencing a tectonic shift. The U.S.'s inward turn created a vacuum that China has been eager to fill. This power shift presents both opportunities and perils. The consequences are far-reaching, reshaping the geopolitical landscape. As China's influence grows, we may witness a departure from the U.S.-led order. This transition could usher in greater uncertainty and instability. The key question is what kind of global power China will choose to be. Will it promote global stability or impose its own values? The answer will determine the fate of the 21st century. The world is watching, waiting to see the outcome. The Trump administration's decision to withdraw from key international agreements and organizations, driven by a narrow America First worldview, has come at a cost. The U.S.'s retreat from global leadership has created a void that China has been quick to fill, advancing its own interests and promoting its own vision of global governance. While the full impact of these developments is yet to be fully realized, it is clear that the world is entering a period of profound transition, marked by uncertainty, instability, and a shifting balance of power. The erosion of the rules-based international order, painstakingly constructed over decades, has created a more unpredictable and dangerous world. The absence of clear leadership and a shared sense of purpose among nations has made it more difficult to address pressing global challenges, such as climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation. The U.S.'s retreat from multilateralism has also emboldened authoritarian powers, who sense an opportunity to challenge the existing order and advance their own agendas. China, in particular, has seized the initiative, expanding its influence within international institutions, forging new economic and political partnerships, and promoting its own authoritarian model of governance as an alternative to Western-style democracy. The world is at a crossroads. The choices made by nations in the coming years, particularly the United States and China, will determine whether this transition leads to greater cooperation and prosperity or greater conflict and instability. The stakes could not be higher. The world stands at the cusp of a new era, one defined by a fundamental shift in the global balance of power. The rise of China, coupled with the relative decline of the United States, has created a more complex and competitive international environment, one in which the old certainties of the post-World War II order no longer hold. The defining question of our time is whether this power transition will lead to a new global equilibrium, one in which the United States and China can coexist peacefully and cooperate on common challenges, or whether it will devolve into a new Cold War, characterized by rivalry, suspicion, and the ever-present threat of conflict. The answer to this question will depend on the choices made by leaders in Washington and Beijing. Will they embrace a spirit of cooperation, recognizing that their country's fates are intertwined and that the greatest challenges facing humanity, climate change, pandemics, nuclear proliferation, can only be addressed through collective action? Or will they succumb to the siren song of nationalism, prioritizing narrow self-interest over the common good and risking a future of conflict and instability? The world is watching, waiting to see whether the United States and China can rise to the challenge of our times and forge a new era of peace, prosperity, and shared progress. The future of humanity may well depend on the choices made in the years to come.